About some of those best management practices with regard to disease management. So thank you, Nicole.
Okay. Alrighty, guys. If anybody can't hear me, let me know. I'm trying not to yell into the mic for Carrie, but I don't know. I don't know what we're going to have. All right. Today I'm going to give two talks. One about 45 minutes. We're going to talk about sanitation and disease prevention, and then I'm going to go into boxwood blight separately because we don't have boxwood blight. I want to talk about a few symptoms and what to look for. But first, we're going to talk about something that should be applicable to everything you do, whether you're landscape, whether you're nursery, greenhouse, retail. It doesn't matter. So disease management in terms of prevention. Okay, so we all think about fungicides when we think about disease management, but much more important than that is going to be sanitation. All right, so let's get started. What is sanitation? It's the same concept as you washing your hands. Okay, you're washing the pathogens down the drain, if you will. Okay, and in this case, we're talking about germs. Okay, the word that I think I hate the most is germs. All right, so we're washing our hands because we're touching shopping carts and doorknobs, and how many of you touch an elevator button with your elbow or that type of thing? I mean, we all do it. We all have this germ phobia, all right? So, but if you wash your hands, why are you not putting those same practices into place in your nursery, in your landscapes, in your retail business, all right? So germs, what the heck is a germ anyway? Does anybody know what a germ is? I had to look it up, all right? What's a germ? According to Google, some of the encyclopedias, it's a microorganism, especially when it's causing disease. Okay, so it's a microbe. A germ is also a bud or an offshoot or a seed that produces a new plant, or rudiments of living things. But when we think germs, we're thinking of that disease-causing microbe. So am I using the word germs in plant pathology? Absolutely not. Okay, we're using the word pathogens in our landscapes. But a pathogen is the same thing as a germ. And if you can make that connection, you can understand why we're going to use sanitation, i.e. washing our hands, if you will, to manage disease in the landscape. Okay, so what are plant pathogens? All right, plant pathogens cause disease. They're the germs that cause disease in the landscape. And I'm going to use the word landscape really generally. This applies to everybody and everything. All right, so what are plant pathogens? They're fungi, bacteria, viruses, nematodes, and water molds. All right, so any of those are kind of encompassed in our plant pathogen definition because they all cause disease. All right, so we're going to go through them really quickly, one by one. But first, what is plant pathology? All right, if a pathogen is one of those germs in the landscape, what is plant pathology? We're the nerds who study plant pathogens, okay? So we study those microorganisms that cause disease. We're not studying lichens, and we're not studying sooty mold that's on the brick faces near distilleries. We're studying those that cause disease. So when I say a pathogen, or if something is pathogenic, it's causing disease. Not all fungi cause disease. Not every mushroom in the lawn is causing a problem, okay? Disease-causing agents is what we're focusing on, all right? And what are diseases? Diseases are the symptoms, all right? If you have a pathogen that infected a plant, you might not see disease, or you might not see symptoms until much later in the season. And that's what makes diseases so difficult, because infection is different than disease, all right? So diseases are those abnormal symptoms caused by those microorganisms, or those germs, if you will, okay? So a diseased plant is a sick plant. All right, so how do we manage diseases? The dreaded disease triangle. So anybody who has taken a plant pathology course or anything, we all think this darn disease triangle. It's not hard. Basically, we're saying, and in order to have disease, we have to have a pathogen. Okay? There has to be a host that's susceptible. If you don't have a host plant, you can't have disease. And we have to have the right environment. And this is where sanitation comes in a lot of times. Environment and this pathogen. Okay? So we have to have a pathogen that causes disease. Again, the mushrooms in the lawn are not going to count. All right? We have to have enough rainfall. This year was very rainy. We all know what disease did this year. Soil temperatures, air temperatures, those types of environments. And of course, your host plant. You have to have a susceptible host. You can't have black spot of rose if you don't have a rose. All right? You can't have downy mildew on or powdery mildew on hydrangea if you don't have a hydrangea. Okay? So you have to have all three components. And the idea behind sanitation is by breaking any one of those sides, you no longer have a triangle. All right? So all we have to do is manage one of those sides, not all three. All right, so that's where we're going with this. So let's first look at pathogens. All right, we're going to break them down one by one. We're going to look at fungi, water molds, bacteria, viruses, and nematodes. We don't deal quite as much. I can touch on some of them and take questions later if you have anything else. All right, let's start with fungi. What in the heck are fungi? This is going to be about 70% of the disease-causing agents that you will encounter in your landscapes, in your nurseries, in your lawns, and in your retail garden centers. Okay, most fungi, we think about leaf spots. A lot of leaf spot causing fungi out there. They also cause root rots, Rhizoctonia, Sclerotinia. Those are fungi. Cankers, those are those big lesions on tree branches and stems and trunks, all right? Cankers, blight. Blight is a sudden death. Blight is when you walk out and every leaf is brown but still attached to the tree. Okay, so a blight is a sudden death. What about visible fruiting bodies? This is a rust. We see the rust. This is spores that we're looking at. Okay, when we see a powdery mildew and they start making those black flecks at the end of the season, those are the fruiting bodies. Okay, those are spore producers or spore holding sacs or fruiting bodies. Okay. A little bit more about fungi. These are some of your needle casts on conifers. All right, we can see these fruiting bodies with the naked eye. They're black. They look like little pepper flakes. All right, some of your cankering diseases. When it gets rainy like this year, a lot of times we'll start seeing sporulation from those cankers. All right, so fruiting bodies, very common. I did mention some of your soil-borne, some of your root rotters. There are fungi that cause root rots. All right, a lot of times when you have a rotting root, what's going to happen is when you lose your root, you're going to see a wilt because because that loss of root is affecting the uptake of water and nutrients. All right, and sometimes, who in here has a greenhouse? Do we have any greenhouse growers here? Couple? All right, sometimes, especially in a really humid greenhouse or retail center greenhouse, we're going to see actual fungi growing on petals. Petunia are the worst in terms of greenhouse fungal pathogens. Okay, this is gray mold or botrytis. Okay, we see it a lot in vegetables too. If anybody has a greenhouse center and you're growing or selling small vegetables in the spring. All right. Next pathogen, bacteria. Bacteria, like fungi, cause leaf spots. They cause cankers. We see a lot of blights. We also see wilt and what we call scorch. Anybody recognize this one? The dreaded bacterial leaf scorch. It's a little bit of an oddball, but most of the time with bacterial diseases, we're going to see a ton of leaf spots and blights. So this is a leaf spot. You see it's delimited by the veins, by the leaf veins, as opposed to, I'm going back to this fungal leaf spot. A fungal leaf spot will jump over a vein, and it'll be more rounded. So bacterial leaf spots are usually delimited by the veins, so you'll see they're more angular. All right, we can also have wilts. Sometimes they'll start with V-shaped lesions and a quick death. All right, so a blight is going to be a quick death. One day you see it, one day you don't see it rather, the next day you do. Okay, really quick. This is bacterial leaf scorch on oak. We also have bacterial leaf scorch on sycamore, maple, and some of our other shade trees. This one is a vascular bacterium. It is colonizing the vascular, the xylem tissue of plants. So as those numbers of bacterial cells build up, it's actually clogging that vascular system. And so there is no uptake of water and nutrients like we expect. And then this is a leaf burn. It's a wilt. Well, those harder leaves don't wilt as much, so we're seeing a lack of water. This is actually the effect, okay? Bacterial cells, especially those that are vascular, they primarily are. There's lots of them. They build up in tissue, and if we plunk them in water, we can see these bacterial cells. We call it streaming. Okay, so when bacterial cells cause a problem, there are lots of them. Just an interesting tidbit. Okay. Next up, water molds. Who knows what a water mold is? If you ever see me, I'm usually preaching water molds. Water molds are not fungi. They're fungus-like. Water molds are your downy mildews, your Phytophthora root rots, and your Pythium root rots. I call them water molds because they are not true fungi, and they cannot be managed with a true fungicide. So if you have a water mold fungus, like a Phytophthora root rot, you're not going to use your typical fungicides to manage it. You've got to have something that's specific to our water molds. We call them oomycetes. You might hear us say that. All right, you can call them water molds, that's okay. Water molds like water. Water molds require a constant film of water in order to complete their life cycles. All right, so if you have a water mold problem, how do you manage a water mold? Turn off the water or improve your drainage, okay? Very different than some of our others. They will cause leaf blotches. They will cause leaf spots sometimes. Primarily, though, we're seeing crown rots, collar rots, root rots, all right? They're usually mushy and smelly. Phytophthora root rot is going to cause a smelly rot. All right, so if you dig a plant up and it smells bad, first of all, you have a water problem, but secondly, you probably are going to have a Phytophthora root rot. You can smell it. Let's see if I have a picture. Okay, so this is a Phytophthora root rot. It's going to start with your feeder roots, so we're going to have a reduction in root system. All right, so what happens when we have a root rot? What symptoms are we going to see above ground? We're not going to see the roots right away, right, unless we start suspecting something, and then we're going to dig. We're going to dig, not pull. But if you start having a root rot problem, some upper canopy symptom is going to be your first indication that there is a problem. So what do? You're going to see wilting. Because with a root loss, we're going to have a restricted uptake of water and nutrients. Okay, so you're going to see the root. When it's really wet and you keep watering and the plant is still wilting, you really have a problem, and you can usually smell it. Okay, so this is Phytophthora root rot here. This is also Phytophthora root rot on the bottom. All right, you see that blackening, that darkening of those roots. That's the initiation, or this is pretty advanced, of these rotten roots. So if you're suspecting root rot, you need to dig the roots. We need to see those feeder roots. You're going to dig, don't pull, and you're going to rinse off those roots. And if you see that they're black, you probably have a problem. Okay, this is Pythium root rot. Pythium, this is what you're going to see is damping off in seedlings. If anybody grows herbaceous plants, you're typically going to see it in herbaceous plants, and it's a root nibbler. So the entire root system is reduced, and it can splash up into that soil, onto that soil line, all right, and cause collar rots. So if you remember anything, water molds need a constant film of water to complete their life cycles. Their spores swim. They have flagella, and they swim like little tadpoles. Without that water, guess what? You're turning off their source of movement, and they cannot complete their life cycle. All right, and this is going to be really important to sanitation. All right, it's going to be really important in a minute, so I'm going to come back to all this. All right, and then there's viruses. We do encounter viruses in the landscape. A lot of them won't hurt us, with the exception of, guess what's up there? Rose rosette. Rose rosette is all of our nightmares. I'm sure you can all agree with me. All right, rose rosette is causing what we call witch's broom a lot of times. Witch's broom are those really close nodes, and there are a lot of growth right on the end of a branch. All right, we also see a lot of misshapen leaves. So kind of strapping, sometimes we call it, misfigured, disfigured. Sometimes long internodes. Sometimes instead of those really sharp nodes causing the witch's broom, we'll see some longer nodes than normal. Okay. We also see leaf mottling, sometimes mosaics. A lot of times this is an indication of a virus. What else though looks like virus symptoms? Speaking of rose rosette, herbicide damage. Usually virus symptoms look like herbicide damage. Usually herbicide damage will be mistaken for viruses. All right, rose rosette, you know, there's all the buzz with rose rosette. Guess what? Over half of what we receive in the diagnostic lab is herbicide damage. And if I visit, I can tell you that a lot of times we'll see herbicide damage. So be very careful, those of you who do maintenance. Be very careful. There are a lot of things. There can be granular herbicides washing down into beds. A lot of things can be causing herbicide damage. But take a look at all the weeds. Usually we don't want to weed inside of a rose bush, right? We're all guilty of that. So we bring out the Roundup. Not even what we're supposed to be using. We just bring out the Roundup. I see some laughing. I've done it too. I'm guilty. We're all guilty. So anyway, herbicide damage. I got off track. Yes, Sarah?
How do you, in diagnostics, what test is performed to positively identify the virus?
We usually use a range of symptoms. I have a rose rosette. If anybody wants it, I have a rose rosette fact sheet that lists the symptoms of rose rosette, and we usually say that we need at least 3 of those symptoms to positively identify rose rosette. There is a PCR test, a molecular test, but that costs a lot of money. So we usually don't use it unless we have a large commercial property and we've struggled with it.
So at first, when this virus started coming around, like in Extension, it was suggested to ship them down to the lab. So if we use your guideline, can we, just in the office, just identify appropriately from that?
Yes.
Sending it to the
Yes. And we see so much rose rosette, your county agent should not have to send it to the lab. You can, I mean, a lot of times it's quite obvious. If it's not quite obvious, we usually ask the grower to go back and give us more sample and let us take a look at it. Usually it'll be one cane and not all. Sometimes we'll see flagging, which will be that really long cane. That reddening, you know, new growth on roses is red. This will remain red. Okay, so witch's broom is another one. Excessive thorniness, all of those thorns really close together, that's usually an indication of rose rosette.
What about on varieties that are thornless, and what's the number of your plant path sheet?
I will pull it up during break. How about that? I don't remember the number.
Okay.
Sure. If you just go to University of Kentucky Department of Plant Pathology, there's an extension publication site, and you can sort through. Yeah, it's there. I'll find it for you, though. Not a problem. Okay, a little bit more about viruses. I'm going to go really quickly. This is called vein clearing. This is the opposite of chlorosis. You know, when we see chlorotic plants that are nitrogen or iron deficient, they are yellow with green veins. This is the opposite. This is what we call vein clearing, okay? Usually an indication of a virus. How about this one? We all know this virus, right? It's called color breaking. That's a good virus. It's one of the few that we don't panic over, all right? So viruses, a lot of different symptoms. We don't see a whole lot of viruses. Those that we do see, we see over and over, like rose rosette. All right, so now let's get to the meat of this talk. Cultural practices, all right? I talked about sanitation. Sanitation is a component of cultural practices, and you are in an IPM workshop, so clearly I don't have to tell you what cultural practices are, but let's discuss it, though, from a disease standpoint, all right? So cultural practices are our indirect approach to disease management. It's the measures that we take to manage disease without fungicides, okay? It's our non-chemical approach. It's what our grandparents did. It's what I do in my home garden just because I don't feel like mixing the sprayer, all right? So cultural practices include disease-resistant materials, disease-resistant plants, a lot of those types of things. But I'm going to talk about one component. I'm going to talk about sanitation, all right? So in terms of sanitation, we're coming in with clean plants. That's a no-brainer, right? We're keeping our plants healthy. Another no-brainer. We're reducing the spread of disease, so if we do get a disease, we're managing it. We're pruning it out. We're taking it off-site. All right? We're cleaning our tools so that we're not spreading it, and we're preventing a pathogen from overwintering. Okay? That sounds simple, right? Then why don't we do it? None of us do it. We're all guilty. So let's talk about sanitation and why it's common sense. All right, so in terms of sanitation, I have broken it up into two components. Excluding it, don't bring it into the darn landscape in the first place, and eradicating it. Okay, if you have it, then you have to get rid of it so that it doesn't continue to sporulate and infect healthy plants. All right, so let's start with exclusion. How do we exclude a disease or a pathogen from our landscape or from our greenhouse or from our nursery? We're starting with clean plants. Again, is that so hard? Sometimes it is. Sometimes we're busy and a shipment comes in and we really don't have time to thumb through it. I had a landscape business myself for 12 years. I know all about it. All right? I tried to handpick every plant that went in the landscape, but darn it, the day that I was busy and I didn't, that's when I brought something in. It happens. All right? But just training your eye to glance over it, to make sure the color's all uniform and there are no odd spots or flagged branches or anything like that, okay? So training your eye. Make sure disease-free plants are coming in from the start, all right? If you're having problems with the grower, change growers, all right? I don't care if it's plugs if you have a commercial nursery. If you have a retail center, sometimes it'll be your other suppliers. If you're in a landscape business, sometimes. All right, healthy roots. What about those root rots that I talked about? Flip that plant out of the pot. Just flip it upside down, take it out of the pot, and make sure those roots are white and healthy. It doesn't take but a second. Because if they're not, you need to turn that shipment right around. If you're not sure before you receive a large shipment, send a couple to the diagnostic lab. That's what we're there for. Sometimes these landscapes do have a pathogen there, very low numbers, okay? But if we're allowing the right cultural conditions for it to continue infecting and build up numbers, then we have a lot of problem, all right? So in terms of sanitation, what do I mean in terms of sanitation for growing conditions? Rake the darn leaves, all right? If you have a leaf spot disease and those leaves are falling to the ground, rake them up and take them off site, all right? So sanitation, think like a pathogen. Guess what this is? We're going to talk about this in a minute. This is boxwood blight. See these spots? See these lesions? These cankers on the stem? You should be able to see that. When you receive a shipment, run your hand through those plants. Open up that canopy. Look at what's in there, right? All right, what about a green bridge? Who knows the term green bridge? I was actually trained in soybean pathology, so I come from a row crop background in addition to the landscape. And we use the term in row crop ag, green bridge. That's when we leave some plant that's also susceptible to a disease in the field so that pathogen can hang on until the next ideal crop comes in. Okay? In the South, I'm from South Louisiana, so in South Louisiana, soybean seedlings hang out all winter. Here, what could it be? How about pansies and some of our cool season annuals? How about some of our weeds? Some of our weeds can carry pathogens with them all winter. You might not see disease symptoms, but that pathogen can hang on and get enough of what it needs to survive the winter until that ideal crop comes back, until that next planting of petunias, okay, until that next planting of shrubs. So a green bridge can be weeds, green bridge can be cool season plants, and green bridge can be some plant that you just heal in, all right? In terms of greenhouses, you can see a lot of green bridge type situations in greenhouses because you've always got something in a greenhouse. And I don't know how many of you know Sarah here. She's the county agent, the horticulture agent in Jefferson County. We've struggled with black root rot in a greenhouse because the grower was not completely emptying the greenhouse between crops. So they were carrying that black root rot pathogen over from crop to crop because they never completely emptied it and sanitized that greenhouse. So that was a green bridge of sorts, okay? All right, what happens then when you've brought in clean plants, but you got a disease anyway? All right, you've already oh wait, I'm still on exclusion. I'm sorry. Okay, one more slide. All right, we're excluding nearby plant parts. What is this? It's a canker. Okay, cankers, guess what? This is a fungal pathogen that is causing this canker. Where is this pathogen? Where's this fungus going to sporulate? Sporulate means produce spores. Spores are going to be produced in that canker, usually early spring when it starts warming up and it's rainy. So what happens if you leave cankered material out in the landscape? Or in this case, what if you buy that canker? What if you buy a tree with this small canker? Plant looks fine. And you buy a tree with that small canker. It's going to sporulate, and those spores are going to infect healthy tissue, healthy plants, nearby plants, and that's how it spreads. All right? Don't buy cankers. Check it out. Examine those plants. And if you have a nursery and you have canker problems, give us a call. We will help you manage it. All right? So now I can get sidetracked, or back on track rather, talk about eradication. Eradication is after we have a disease problem, after we have infection, after we have an issue, then we have to get rid of it. Okay? We tried to bring in clean plants, we did our best, now we've got to eradicate it. And how do we do that? Well, a lot of times when we're dealing with woody plants, we're dealing with cankers of some sort. We know fire blight, right? I do fruit crops too, but we all deal with fire blight in flowering pear. The dreaded flowering pear and fire blight. So in terms of cankers, these pathogens a lot of times are going to overwinter in dead wood. Not just fire blight infected woody tissue, but also other dead wood, just dead wood. Anything that's diseased, even diseases from another pathogen. Woody tissue is a great overwintering site, okay? So what are you going to do? You're going to cut it out. Cut out cankers and remove them from sight. If you cut out a canker and you throw that branch down in the nursery or in the landscape, it will continue to sporulate. It will produce spores and they will splash up when it rains or they will blow when it's windy. Okay, so we're not just cutting it out, we're removing it from the site. All right, what about debris? I talked about this earlier. Any cuttings. Anytime you take cuttings, have a wheelbarrow there or a cart if you have a large nursery. Cut it and drop it straight onto a cart and move it out of there, okay? Rake, even if you have a nursery. I had a friend with a nursery in South Louisiana who swept his ground cover cloth on a regular basis. And it was kind of comical, you know, to go there to buy plants. And he was sweeping, but guess what? He didn't have disease issues, all right? So sanitation, sanitation, sanitation. Like I said, use a cart. If you start having disease problems, get it out of there, all right? Get it out. This is black root rot for those of you who have not experienced it, all right? It's a soil-borne pathogen that is impossible to manage with fungicides. All right. Then, in terms of sanitation, sterilization, clean everything. If you have a disease outbreak, I keep standing in your way, I'm sorry. If you have a disease outbreak, clean up, clean your tools, sanitize the greenhouse, all right? Who sanitizes tools when they have an outbreak? Any of you do that? Okay, I'm in the way again. All right, who sanitizes? Clean your tools. Bleach.
Depends on what you're doing.
Lysol, depending on what you're doing, right, because it's not practical to do it every time. I'd love to see you do it every time, but it's not practical. But if you do have a disease outbreak, Lysol, the Lysol concentrate mixed at about 10%. 10% bleach. There are a lot of commercial sanitizers out there. But if you have a small business, use bleach or Lysol. Rubbing alcohol, I like it at about 100%. Just rubbing alcohol from CVS. All right? What about containers? Who reuses containers? I mean, I'm not going to throw them away, but they need to be bleached in between. Okay? Sanitize those containers if you're reusing. Your shoes. Have you ever considered shoes in the greenhouse that I was talking about with Sarah? I think a lot of it, you know, we suggested that they put in a mat or they put in some type of sanitation foot bath because there was such a problem. So a lot of times these soil-borne pathogens in particular, they'll stick to the bottom of your shoes. Phytophthora root rot. If there's an outbreak in a nursery situation, you're carrying those propagules on the bottoms of your shoes. Okay? Anything that's wet. If you have a greenhouse, even if you have just a hoop house at a retail establishment, all right, you're going to sanitize benches, floors, walls, tools, every hard surface needs to be sterilized in between crops. All right, that will eliminate anything, especially if you have a disease problem. All right, so we measure disease in terms of risk. So a lot of times you'll hear from entomologists, they'll talk about scouting and trapping. We measure risk. We look at the history of your nursery, the history of a landscape, all right? And with high risk, we're going to start using some of these methods to reduce that risk. All right? Sometimes you just have to give up, though. Sometimes you just can't prune it out. Sometimes you have to get rid of it. All right? You got to rogue it out. Roguing means throwing it away. All right? Sometimes it's just got to go. All right? Sometimes we have to rotate out. Sometimes if it's a host-specific disease, we just can't plant it anymore. All right? Often I get requests, you know, if there's sclerotinia or rhizoctonia in soil in beds. I get requests. Give me a list of rhizoctonia-resistant bedding plants. So a lot of times we just have to rotate out of a particular plant. Okay? All right. So in terms of your disease triangle, let's go back to our disease triangle. What did we talk about? The three sides, which was the pathogen, the host plant, and the conditions. All right? So I've been talking about getting rid of that pathogen. So if the pathogen is not there, we can't have disease. All right? So I focused on that. So what are you doing now? What are you doing when you go back home? How are you going to deal with it? Are you going to rethink it? Are you going to be able to walk into a landscape? If you're managing a landscape, those of you who do landscape maintenance, or even if you're installing, how do you apply these techniques? All right, they're really not hard if you just think about it. So nothing is impossible here. We're not asking you to do anything that you're probably not doing anyway. Take a second look and be willing to reject shipments. All right? If you have disease, identify it. That's what we're here for. We have a diagnostic lab. You have wonderful agents. The state of Kentucky is one of the best cooperative extension services in the country. You have wonderful county agents in all of your counties. You should know them well. Some of you have horticulture agents. All right? In addition to your ag agents. So get to know your agents. All right? Know what to look for, especially if you have history of disease. If you're having a history of a disease, always go back and analyze what that risk might be and take measures to keep it from happening. Because by using proper sanitation practices, cultural practices in general, you can eliminate about 70% of your disease problems without picking up fungicides. All right, 70%, that's huge. And guess where those profits are? In your pocket. All right? Train your employees. That's hard sometimes, all right, especially when we have high turnover. But really help them understand why they're doing what they're doing, all right? Your sanitation program is only strong as its weakest link. It takes just one person to drag that dirty garden hose through a greenhouse to spread black root rot into the next house. All right, so you must train your employees. You got to keep your eyes open, again, especially if there's history of disease. You're not all going to know every disease, and that's okay. You're going to be able to go in and know those key diseases. Say, oh, that looks like the early symptoms of rose rosette in rose, or that looks like early symptoms of black root rot in pansy. All right, so know those common diseases for you. All right, and then keep learning. We have a ton of materials on our website, and I'm going to show it to you real quick. All right, we have a ton of materials, and look it up. Look it up. Don't be afraid to do a Google search. If you're not sure if it's a disease or not, start with a Google search. Text pictures to your agents. A lot of us prefer text. If I'm driving, text me. I'll look at it. All right, agents text me all the time. Take a look at it, and I'll at least say, oh, that looks really serious. Send a sample in right now. Okay, I'm out of state, I'm traveling, but hey, send that sample to the diagnostic lab. Alrighty, so some of my information here. I do Facebook a lot. A lot of times I'll add links there. If any of you Facebook, hey, you know what I have? I brought books. The first 3 of you to like me on Facebook, kyplantdisease.com, I have really great books here.
What if I already like you on Facebook?
Like me again. I know, I see. I don't know, I'm teasing. Okay, I have 3 copies left of this. This is the IPM for select deciduous trees. So these are the top 10 nursery trees. And it is nursery geared, but it's not exclusive to nursery. We discuss a lot of disease, insect, and horticultural issues, fertility, that type of thing. So follow me on Facebook. There's a lot of information there. Twitter, I also do a blog. If something is real common, I write a lot on that type of thing. It's like a fact sheet that's that comes to your email box, actually. But a lot of this type of information. This was a very rainy year, for instance. So as we started seeing downy mildews come through the landscapes, I'll put out alerts, that type of thing. Okay. So, any questions on sanitation?
This video has been part of the University of Kentucky Nursery Crops web series. For more information on the topics discussed, please contact your county extension office.